The copper taste of the poison was still burning my throat as I watched my own son, Marcus, slide my $50,000 diamond ring off my finger. Finally, he whispered, "The old queen is dead." I lay there, paralyzed on the cold marble, screaming in a silent vacuum while they toasted to my death with the very wine that was killing me. They didn't know that my heart was still beating, barely, or that I had a hidden camera recording every word of their confession. But as I faded into the black, the front door creaked open, and a person I hadn't seen in 20 years walked in, looking at my son and saying, "You did it wrong, she's still breathing." Who was this stranger who knew my son's darkest secret? And what did I find out about my late husband's death while I was trapped under the floorboards of my own home? You need to watch this entire story until the very last second, because the person who finally saved me didn't do it out of love. They did it because they wanted to be the ones to finish me off. The truth is more twisted than a nightmare, and it all starts with the one secret I never told my son. If you are new to the channel, please support me by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Also, tell me in the comments from where you are watching so I may know where my voice is reaching. Please like the video to help us share more of these stories. My name is Elena Vance, and I spent 30 years building a billion-dollar real estate empire from the dirt up. I thought I had secured my family's future, but lately, the atmosphere in my mansion had turned bone-chillingly cold. My son, Marcus, and his wife, Tasha, were constantly whispering in corners, their eyes darting away whenever I entered the room. A few days ago, I stumbled upon a hidden file in Marcus's office containing legal documents to have me declared mentally incompetent, and a transfer of all my assets to his name. I also noticed that the evening tea Tasha made for me had developed a strange, metallic bitterness that lingered on my tongue for hours. It became painfully clear that my own flesh and blood were tired of waiting for their inheritance. They wanted the crown now, and they were willing to spill my blood to get it. On the night of my 61st birthday, Marcus handed me a glass of my favorite vintage wine, though his hands were trembling so much the crystal clinked against his ring. "To your legacy, Mama, and to a long, peaceful rest," he said, his voice dropping into a tone that sent shivers down my spine. I took a few sips, and within minutes, my lungs felt as if they were being filled with molten lead, and the world began to tilt violently. I collapsed onto the Persian rug, my body completely paralyzed but my mind terrifyingly sharp and awake. I watched from the floor as Marcus didn't scream for an ambulance. Instead, he casually checked his watch and started pulling the diamond earrings from my lobes. Tasha stood over me, laughing about how they would report it as a sudden heart attack, brought on by age, never realizing that I was witnessing every second of their monstrous betrayal. Just as the darkness began to pull at the edges of my vision, I heard a familiar creak from the floorboards near my walk-in closet. A secret panel slid open, and Julian, my late husband's brother whom I had exiled 10 years ago for embezzlement, emerged from the shadows of a hidden crawlspace. I had spent a decade hating this man, but now he was the only thing standing between me and a shallow grave. He didn't look like the thief I remembered. He moved with the precision of a soldier as he knelt beside me and forced a clear, pungent liquid down my throat. "Don't die yet, Elena, you haven't seen the whole play," he hissed into my ear as the burning in my chest began to subside into a dull ache. He dragged my limp body into the darkness of the crawlspace just as Marcus returned to the room with a body bag. Finding nothing but an empty rug and a shattered wine glass. Deep under the floorboards, Julian revealed a truth that shattered my world even further. He had been wearing a wire and monitoring my home for months. He hadn't been embezzling money years ago. He had been moving funds to a secure account because my husband, Silas, knew Marcus was a developing sociopath. Julian turned on a small tablet, showing me a live feed of the basement where my loyal assistant, Sarah, was dousing the foundation pillars in gasoline. They weren't just planning to kill me with poison. They were going to burn the entire mansion to the ground to erase any forensic evidence of the toxin. I watched my son on the screen, his face twisted in a panicked rage as he searched for my missing body, while Sarah calmly struck a match. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The people I trusted most had formed a death pact to erase my very existence from the earth. The house exploded with a deafening roar that shook the very earth, and I watched through the narrow vents as my legacy turned into a pillar of fire. Julian pulled me through a labyrinth of narrow, soot-filled tunnels that my husband had built as a Cold War-era bunker, leading us nearly a mile away to a hidden exit in the woods. As I gasped for the cool night air, I looked back to see Marcus standing on the front lawn, wailing for the news cameras and playing the part of the heartbroken son perfectly. The fire lit up the sky, a funeral pyre for the woman I used to be, but in that moment, the mother in me died and a ghost was born. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a phantom with a digital record of every word they had spoken and every drop of gasoline they had poured, and I was going to make sure they burned in a fire of their own making. We retreated to a high-tech safe house hidden in the industrial district, where Julian showed me the files my husband Silas had died to protect. It turned out Marcus hadn't acted alone, he was being funded by the Obsidian Group, a shadow corporation that had been trying to hostilely take over my firm for years. My blood turned to ice when I found a hidden medical report from 2 years ago, the day my husband died of what we thought was a natural heart attack. The toxicology results were identical to the poison I had just swallowed. Marcus had murdered his own father to clear his path to the throne. The depth of his depravity was bottomless, and the realization that I had raised a monster who had already killed the love of my life filled me with a cold, murderous resolve that replaced any lingering drop of maternal love. The following morning was the emergency board meeting where Marcus intended to declare me legally dead and appoint himself the permanent chairman of the Vance Empire. I spent the dawn hours in disguise, wearing a dark wig and heavy makeup to hide the paleness of my skin, moving through the city like a shadow among the living. Julian had successfully bypassed the building's mainframes, preparing to broadcast the footage of the poisoning and the arson to every screen in the boardroom. We were inches away from the elevator that would lead to my final confrontation when Julian suddenly stopped and blocked my path, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and deep regret, his voice trembling as he said, "I'm so sorry, Elena, but some debts are too high to pay with honor." In a second betrayal that cut deeper than the first, Julian handed the evidence drive to a group of armed guards and pinned my arms behind my back. "The Obsidian Group has my daughter, Elena. They told me if I didn't deliver you to them alive this morning, I'd receive her in a box," he whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. I was dragged into the penthouse boardroom where Marcus was already sitting in my leather chair, a glass of champagne in his hand and a look of ultimate victory on his face. He sneered at me, completely unfazed by my survival, as if my life was nothing more than a minor administrative error he was about to fix. They didn't just want me dead, they needed my retinal scan and voice authorization to unlock the final $500 million trust fund that was the heart of the company. Marcus leaned over me, his breath smelling of expensive cigars and cold malice, as he forced my head toward the biometric scanner on the table. "Just give us the scan, Mama, and maybe I'll let you live out your days in a padded cell instead of a coffin," he mocked, while Sarah stood by with a suppressed pistol pointed at my heart. I didn't fight him, instead, I leaned into the scanner and whispered a phrase that only I knew, "Code Black, total liquidation." The room's lights instantly turned blood red, and a heavy steel shutter slammed down over the windows, locking us all in a high-security vault. I had installed this kidnap protocol years ago as a failsafe, and now it was broadcasting a live, unhackable stream of the penthouse to every major news network and police station in the country. The room erupted into total, screaming chaos as Marcus realized his smug confession was being watched by millions of people in real time on national television. Julian, seeing his chance to fix his mistake, lunged at the guards, using the distraction to grab the daughter he had been told was in the building. I stood in the center of the storm, my voice amplified by the room's speakers as I listed every crime Marcus and the Obsidian Group had committed over the last decade. The sound of police helicopters began to thrum outside the reinforced glass, and the heavy thud of a battering ram echoed against the penthouse doors. Marcus's face transformed from a mask of arrogance to one of pathetic, whimpering fear as the walls of his stolen kingdom literally began to close in on him. The SWAT team breached the penthouse with flashbangs that turned the room into a blinding white void, and within seconds, Marcus was face down on the marble floor with a boot on his neck. Tasha and Sarah were caught in the underground parking garage, their trunks loaded with millions in stolen bearer bonds and the jewelry they had stripped from my bedroom. As the officers led Sarah past me, she didn't look afraid. She leaned in and whispered, "You think you've won, but you still haven't looked at the bottom of the safe, Elena." Her words felt like a cold needle in my heart, a hint that the web of lies was much larger than a simple corporate takeover. Even as I watched my betrayers being loaded into police vans, I felt a lingering sense of dread that the true mastermind was still hiding in the shadows. Days later, I returned to the smoldering ruins of my mansion with a forensic team to recover the contents of the reinforced safe that had survived the inferno. Inside, hidden beneath the charred deeds and gold bars, was a small, velvet-lined box that my husband Silas had told me never to open unless the world was ending. I opened it to find a birth certificate for a girl named Sarah, born 3 years before Marcus, and a series of letters detailing a secret life Silas had led for decades. Sarah wasn't just my assistant, she was Silas's firstborn daughter from a secret marriage, the rightful heir who had been discarded and left to grow up in poverty while Marcus lived in luxury. The betrayal wasn't just a plot for money, it was a decades-old blood feud fueled by a sister's revenge for a life she felt had been stolen from her. The deeper I dug into the box, the more the foundation of my life began to crumble away like ash, revealing a history built on a graveyard of secrets. I found a photograph of my own mother standing next to Sarah's mother, and the resemblance was so striking it made my breath hitch in my throat. My mother hadn't just been a maid for the wealthy, she had been part of a hidden family tree that connected me to Sarah in a way that made my stomach churn. I realized that my marriage to Silas hadn't been a fairy tale of two people building an empire, but a calculated move in a game that started long before I was born. Every smile Silas had given me and every miracle Marcus had performed was part of a script written by people who viewed our family as nothing more than pieces on a chessboard. Julian's daughter was eventually found in a safe house in another state, and though he faced charges for his temporary betrayal, I used my remaining influence to ensure his cooperation was rewarded. I stood on the balcony of my new glass office, looking out at the city that still whispered the name Vance, but the name no longer felt like a badge of honor. The Obsidian Group was being investigated by the FBI, and their stocks were in a freefall, yet I knew the Hydra had more than one head. I received a mysterious package on my desk containing a single black obsidian stone and a note that read, "The harvest is only beginning, Elena. Your husband was just the first seed." I realized that even with Marcus behind bars, the true architects of my misery were still watching me from the high-rises across the street. The lead investigator for the case walked into my office late that evening, but he didn't have any files or handcuffs. He simply sat down and poured himself a drink from my decanter. He looked at me with a strange, familiar smile and said, "You did well to survive the fire, Elena, but did you really think your husband acted alone in choosing you?" I looked at his eyes, the same shade of amber as my late husband's, and the truth hit me with the force of a tidal wave. He wasn't there to close the case. He was the one who had written the script from the very beginning, a silent partner in the Obsidian Group who had been waiting for me to prove I was strong enough to lead. I am Elena Vance, and I have realized that to survive in this family, I don't just have to fight the monsters, I have to become the queen of them.